Well, the problem is George, of course. It's not
Yeah.
anything more or less than that. And you've got to remember, Lewis wanted to keep Valtteri. So something big happened there over the winter in Lewis's mind. Apart from a whole Abu Dhabi thing, they didn't listen to him and they signed George. And there are a lot of good reasons to have George. He's the future. If Lewis retires, they've got the guy. He's the best, more points for the team, all the rest of it. All of them actually amount to nothing if you put them alongside Michael Schumacher's obvious evidence of how to win a championship. You don't play around, and every point counts.
Wow.
So Valtteri, in that respect, was the perfect other driver for Lewis, in the same way that Sergio Perez is the perfect other driver for Max Verstappen. Red Bull would never in a million years have thought of signing George Russell, even if he was available, and put him alongside Max Verstappen.
Hi guys, this is a casual fan. George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. Two elite drivers, and both of them driving for Mercedes, and both of them capable of winning the World Championship. Now there has been a bit of friction between the two, and there have been suggestions all over social media and even from the pundits as well that having George Russell team up with Lewis has led to the Mercedes lineup being a suboptimal one. And there are quite a few that feel that if it was Valtteri Bottas in place of George, we would not be seeing these many issues. A lot of them felt that Lewis was blocked by George in Singapore, where in the last stint, it did appear that Lewis had the faster car. And if it was Lewis instead of George who was targeting or challenging Lando Norris, he would have won the race. Then there are others as well who have raised question marks over George's conduct as a teammate in Suzuka. The two drivers battled each other on track, Lewis pushed George wide, and there were too many moments where the two drivers were fighting with each other and losing time. All of this has led to suggestions that the Lewis Hamilton-George Russell lineup is not optimal. Well, in my view, I think I agree with this. A lineup with Lewis Hamilton and George Russell in the same team is not optimal. But what if I told you that Mercedes was forced to sign this suboptimal lineup because of only one man, and that was Lewis Hamilton? Yes, the reason why Mercedes finds itself in this position where it has a suboptimal lineup of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell is because of Lewis. In this video, I'll dissect both these claims. The first, that having George as a teammate for Lewis is actually suboptimal for Mercedes. And the second claim that ultimately Lewis is to be blamed for Mercedes being forced to sign George Russell. Now, first of all, let's talk about why the lineup of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton is suboptimal. Now, talking about the lineup, let's get a few things straight. Having a lineup where you have two elite drivers like Lewis and George, it means that it is going to benefit you a lot in the Constructors' Championship. And you can see it this season as well. As for instance, while Mercedes is currently second in the championship, we can see how Aston Martin has struggled because it is basically a one-driver team. That is where the benefit of having a lineup like George Russell and Lewis Hamilton comes in handy. However, having a similar lineup is actually a huge headache if you're fighting for the driver's title. And the reason behind that is you have two elite drivers that are going to take points off each other. And more than that, if you have in opposition a driver like Max Verstappen who is going to maximize every opportunity, and on the other side you have both George and Lewis taking points off each other and not being able to maximize the Mercedes machinery. What happens in this case is that Max Verstappen will end up benefiting because he will not have a teammate that will take points off him. And that is where a Mercedes lineup proves to be suboptimal. Now, just for instance, you can take a look at the example of what happened in Suzuka, where both Mercedes drivers were tripping over each other. When that happens, you lose time, and your other opponent in a different team ends up taking advantage of it. And that is why the Mercedes lineup is actually suboptimal if you're trying to win a Drivers' World Championship. Now, talking about the second point on why Mercedes was forced to sign George Russell by Lewis Hamilton, I think we need to go back to 2021 when the decision was made. Now, if we look back at that season, Lewis was in a championship battle with Max Verstappen. Valtteri Bottas was struggling, but at the same point in time, there was another thing that was happening and becoming quite clear, and that was that George Russell is an elite talent. The kind of laps that he put together in Spa and other performances in quite a few races, and you could see that he had ultimately been able to prove that the kind of talent that he had, that he was going to be an asset for any team. Now Mercedes, well, ultimately it had invested a lot in George's career. He was a Mercedes Academy driver when he won the F2 World Championship, beating Lando Norris and Alex Albon. Now when a driver has done that, you expect the team that has backed him until this stage to ultimately take him to the next step and ultimately promote him. So Mercedes was forced on that front. More importantly, the another issue that Mercedes faced was that George had been stuck with Williams, a backmarker, for 3 years. If Mercedes had not signed George for 2022, George would have been poached by any of the rivals. You could have seen him at Ferrari, you could have seen him probably at McLaren, and you could have seen him at any other team. If that had happened, you would have seen the scenario that we are currently seeing with Alpine, where it lost Oscar Piastri. Mercedes would have suffered from the same fate. Having said that, Mercedes could have even taken the burden of that if it knew that Lewis Hamilton was going to stay with the team for long term. It did not know that. In 2021, Lewis Hamilton was already a 7-time world champion, and his contract was ending at the end of the 2023 F1 season. Imagine Lewis Hamilton becoming an 8-time world champion by the end of 2021. And in the eyes of many, he would have been an undisputed greatest of all time. If that was the case, and Mercedes steps into a new era in 2022 and is struggling like it did, would Lewis Hamilton have stuck around and signed an extension? Probably not. He would have retired because he would not have wanted to drive an uncompetitive car. In that scenario, Mercedes would have been stuck with Valtteri Bottas in one seat and George Russell, who has been already poached by any other team. Mercedes did not want to be in that scenario, and that is why it had to sign George Russell, because it did not know how long Lewis was going to be a part of the team. And finally, even right now, there are many that could think that, okay, Lewis is staying for another couple of years. Maybe Mercedes could sign someone else and replace George. Could they? Does it make any sense? First of all, George himself is an elite driver. Secondly, imagine Lewis wins his 8th title in 2024. Will he stick around after that? No, he won't. He might, if he has the hunger, but arguably close to 40 years of age, you do not bank on something like this. And that is the reason. Ultimately, Mercedes, if it was probably 2014, 2015, 2016, something like that, where Lewis still had the hunger and still had a target that he had to reach that was long term, then Mercedes would have stuck with him and probably not promoted George Russell as well. Just like it did not with Esteban Ocon, who was ultimately let go and allowed to join Renault. The reason why Mercedes ultimately has to bite the bullet and take the pain of a suboptimal George Russell-Lewis Hamilton partnership is because it does not know how long Lewis is going to be part of F1. If Lewis retires at the end of next season, Mercedes will not have an elite driver in the team. And that is the problem it did not want to face. And that is why today we are looking at a scenario where Mercedes has a suboptimal driver lineup that is too close to each other in terms of performance levels and ends up taking points off each other. And if there is one driver and one person that is to blame for all of this, it is Lewis Hamilton. If Lewis Hamilton had committed for the next 5 years to be a Mercedes driver, you will be looking at a completely different lineup. But that's not the case. And that is where the problem lies for Mercedes. Mercedes is not running with a suboptimal lineup because it wants to, because it's not aware. It is doing that because ultimately at the end of the day, George Russell is the future of Mercedes. And Lewis Hamilton, he might be there for a year or so, as long as his current contract continues. But beyond that, you cannot guarantee anything. And that is the main issue that Toto Wolff faced. Why Mercedes has a suboptimal lineup? It's because of Lewis Hamilton. So that's my take on the entire thing. Do let me know what you guys think. Drop your views in the comment section. Please like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.